Hello, welcome to the My Favorite Question podcast, episode 1, with me, Sean Dent, and my guest, Alexander Arguelles. Alexander Arguelles is an American linguist and polyglot who has dedicated his life to studying as many languages as he can, as well as he can. And he runs an academy called the Alexander Arguelles Academy of Languages and Literatures, where you can go and study with him and learn how to do the same yourself. I study with him in the academy, and at the time when we recorded this, I was taking part in his Path of the Polyglot course. He runs a similar version of that course now, and during that course, he introduced us to some scholars who were interested in studying to develop an encyclopedic mind. And this whole concept fascinated me, and that's the main thrust of our conversation. We also talk about language learning, polyliteracy, how to develop your mind, and the role of great books in that process too. So enjoy.
I'm going to quote you, right? So I've got a little quote from your original website, or your old website, should I say, where you wrote about your educational philosophy, Professor. And this was the first place I heard this concept of the encyclopedic mind. So I want to read it to you, and then I have a question for you.
Sure.
So the quote is, "I have never wanted to be anything but a scholar. And by that, I don't mean merely an expert in some subfield of fragmented knowledge, but rather someone who studies all the time so as to build an encyclopedic mind. I am engaged upon a lifelong quest for learning in the sense of continuously challenging myself to expand my horizons, and the study of languages is my passport." So the first question is, that's from your old website, so that's more than 10 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And does that still summarize your thoughts concisely?
Absolutely.
Would you add anything?
Obviously, I was, thinking about that when I was writing that up, so I was like, had that on the, sort of on the tip of my tongue, as it were, the point of my brain. I don't go around, with that phrasing in my head all day, every day, because it is who I am. It is what I do, but I have not changed in that regard. No, I still absolutely regard, the learning of languages, the passport of being able to read the seminal works in the original languages they were written in, and to try to read a great variety of different types of works from different cultures, different perspectives, and very importantly, to try to keep more and more of it actually in my mind, rather than just, oh, I read that, I knew that, I know where to reference it and look at it again. But for that encyclopedic mind building, to actually have stuff in your mind, and not that one would want to be locked into a closet, just made to sit there for hours or days. But imagine that you could, and that you could totally almost go through information in your head and not get bored, and not not know what to think, and not have a frame of reference, and things that you could understand the situation from by just going through what you already have read and stored away in your mind.
I suppose a lot of people, or some people, might hear that and think of just memorization. But from what you've just said there, that goes into my next question, was going to be, so what do you really mean by an encyclopedic mind? So it's clearly not just memorization, is it? There's a bit more to it. So can you say a bit more about how you view that term? What does it mean to you?
Well, you also have a background in history, correct? So I think you and I have something in common, that I just have never had a hard time remembering dates. I know a lot of people have a hard time remembering dates, but it just makes sense to me to have dates. And when you get more and more dates, you get a framework of reference. What happened when, and what's the sequence, and how are things related, and how are things connected? And so doing that not just with dates, but with all sorts of information. That's what I mean by having an encyclopedic mind. I guess I could make the analogy of imagining a loom that's being set up to weave a magnificent and beautiful tapestry. Originally, it's just a framework of a machine, and then there's some wires on it, and then you lay some, strands of yarn, and then they start to cross through. And the more you add to it, the more of a context it is, the more a picture starts to emerge, the more you can look at it and see it from different angles. You're now, and hearing me talk about this in the Path of the Polyglot, I really think that, the languages that we happen to speak and use are all subsets or fragments of a larger idea of language or a concept of language. And if you only know your one language, your mother language, for us English, we would just look at that and we might think this is identical with that. Language is English. But when you learn other languages and you can look at it from different perspectives and see it from different angles and understand it from really in totally different terms. That's what I mean. So having not at all memorization that I could just sort of rattle off a list. Oh, ask me about Charles Darwin. Okay, he was born in this year and he had this and he wrote. No, I'm not talking about. I'm talking about taking Darwin's ideas and really understanding them, having them being not just something. Oh yes, everybody knows what Darwin is, but part of the project is, again, what you're involved in is reading the great books. So reading books by people like Darwin, know what they actually said, and in conversation with other great books, in conversation with other great minds. So it's, I would say it is kind of rewarding to memorize certain works of well-written poetry and have, be able to recite something, the way a bard or a Minnesänger or, a troubadour might have done. I think to have works of literature internalized to the point where you could actually recite them rather than needing to read them. I think that's really exciting, and I like that kind of idea about memorization. But on the broader scale, just in terms of more than being able to reel off detailed factoids about something, but having a sort of processed understanding of it internalized. That's what I mean.
So you mentioned the great books there, and I want to come back to that. I've got some questions about the great books and how it all fits into it that I want to ask you. But before that, I just want to stay a little bit more and go a bit deeper into this idea. So you mentioned Path of the Polyglot, which is a course that I've been participating in with you for the past just over a year now. And in that, a few months ago now, you gave us some biographies of polyglots. And it was during, I mentioned, actually, no, perhaps I didn't say it actually earlier, just to give a bit more context to when I first read that quote of yours on the website. That for me was the first time I'd heard this idea. And for me, that was like a light bulb moment. This was that's actually what I've been doing. I haven't consciously thought of it that way, but in many ways, that is what I've been doing all of my life to some extent. And then when you were giving these biographies, that some of those people I had the same light bulb moment of like, oh, so this isn't just a new idea. This is something that has existed in the past. And there was one, so I went back through my notes and I was looking at researching some of these guys. And there was one guy in particular who really jumped out to me, and that was Johann Amos Comenius.
Comenius,
Yeah, so I was curious, he has this idea of pan-sophism, and he took this idea very far. So I was curious is he someone that well, first of all, could you summarize his ideas? How would you summarize them? If not,
you're putting me on there. Yeah, I'm not sure that I can summarize Comenian pan-sophism, but I can say, in a sense, I can help you make you familiar with that. And you were a little bit nervous because I promoted you to intermediate Latin now, but we're ready to start looking at dialogues and stuff from there. And he wrote a lot of dialogues that are good for the useful learning of Latin. And so when you read that, you can get an idea, something of his worldview and the idea. But yeah, I'm just talking, as you read, yes, people like Comenius, people like Raymond Lull, the Catalan from the 14th, 13th, 14th century, even up to, some 18th and 19th century figures still had the concept in their mind of not wanting to be fragmented in terms of knowledge, but to have a holistic sort of understanding of the world and to develop this, continuously as long as you lived. And I've always really admired some of the medieval we call them encyclopedists, people who could just sort of, truly write out, an encyclopedia of the knowledge that was available to them at that time. And sometimes modern contemporary people like to look at that and sort of scoff and say, well, look how little knowledge they had at that time. Those are the Dark Ages. But that's totally, A, I think that's wrong for the most part. And B, I think that's just the concept though of saying I want to have holistic breadth. I want to really, be able to tie things together and see, relationships. I don't want to have those moments of ignorance when I say I don't know anything about that. I have no way of judging, no way of looking. I mean, there's some things that you maybe don't care about. There's so many things under the sun. It doesn't mean you have to be, absolutely know it all about everything, but about the kind of things that you care about the kind of things that are important to you. It's interesting always to have those what did you say, the light bulb moments when it's like, oh, I never heard of this person before, and he sounds fascinating. It's great to add that in, but yeah, to have a context to add that into is sort of the framework that I like to think that I set up when I was maybe younger, and I've been sort of filling in since then.
So I know I put you on the spot there, but I can give a bit more summary to his to his specific ideas, because I was curious to know if your ideas on this have been heavily influenced by one or a particular person or school of thought, or if it's something you've come to on your own. But just to summarize his ideas, so he put forward this idea, but it is really interesting. When I was reading about it, it says he put forward this idea of universal education. Basically, he was very ahead of his time. You said about being good at dates, and it was 1600 and something. I didn't make the effort to remember that date, but it will come back to me next time I read about it. Yeah, he pushed for universal education, male, female, mentally disabled or not, everyone. And his whole concept was if everyone, and he viewed it as like stages of education, that we should educate people at this age until this level. And he laid out a whole framework for it. He was one of the first people to lay out a kind of framework of education. And he really saw it as a religious, there was a religious pursuit to it. There was this idea that if everyone can know more about everything, everyone would get along more. And it would like he saw it as preparing the world for the coming of Jesus, the second coming. So I guess as you couldn't summarize it, you didn't specifically like hear his views and find them and then shape your own ideas on it. But I'm curious, was there another writer or a specific person like that influenced you in that sense?
No, I don't think that there was any one particular person, I read ideas. I mean, it's just it is a value that I do think I've always had. I don't think I came to the idea by reading about other people's having it. It's very nice to read about other people having similar ideas and get things, but I do think in my case it was just something that I sort of came to just by the way I grew up in a sense. I mean, it's dark behind me. You can see I've got a lot of books just like you do, but I mean at you too, but I've, just grew up in a home full of books and spent more time in libraries than I spent in other places. And my memory of my high school years here is just somehow voraciously reading histories of philosophy, histories of history, works of literature in translation at that point, but like all of Dostoevsky, all of Tolstoy, and just sort of reading voraciously and wanting to have a context to put it in. And always valued that sort of approach of maximum reading, maximum learning, and maximum contextualization of what you are reading in terms of history and how you might understand it.
Yes, so that's interesting because again, when I was thinking about this, I've had this similar question in my mind. I've wondered recently. In fact, when Steve was interviewing me, I mentioned Steve interviewed me previously. We spoke about, and when we were speaking, one of his questions was just, "Why do you think you think like this? Why are you interested in this?" And I hadn't really thought about it until he said it, because I haven't been encouraged, so to speak. If anything, probably a bit discouraged. Like, oh, come on, Sean, do you have to? What here?
Yeah.
Let's talk about something else.
Yeah.
So I was curious, connected to that though, connected to that idea of universally encouraging this form of education. Would you go that far to say that this is something that should be encouraged universally, or is it something that perhaps should only be pursued by certain people, or is not for everyone, so to speak?
It's kind of Gnostic, isn't it? I mean, it would be really idealistic to imagine, maybe Comenius did hope and imagine that it would get out there and hit everybody. But I don't want to sound too down or cynical, but I just think that, yeah, this is just not, this is not a I mean, the fact that you and I have found each other, I mean, we're not alone. There are kindred spirits. There are certainly there's a human personality type. There's a mind, there's a heart, there's a soul that yearns for this kind of thing that, that is to be out there and found. If there are 8 billion of us, I'm sure millions and millions. But that said, I think that this is kind of a rare aspiration that can't be forced, and maybe can be given good examples and have something around. It ought to be, around as an opportunity or as an option, but to really sort of start prescribing this in a world where the current educational landscape is it as it is. That's very, very, very idealistic.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, that would be well, we can. I'd had a load of ideas for questions relating to educational systems and things, but I thought, I know where that conversation will go. We've spoken about this in other conversations, so I thought we'll stick to more fun things.
Okay.
So we can go there if you want.
No, let's stick to more fun things.
Yeah, your videos on the great books were basically the first. Again, your videos and your old website was the first place that I was exposed to this idea. And well, actually, maybe quickly, I'll put the links to those videos into the description, but could you summarize what a great books education is quickly for someone who might not know what that is?
Okay, great books education is the idea that for centuries, when people who got educations by reading, a sort of a canon of classical texts. Plutarch's Lives would just be an integral part of your educational formation when you were, growing up, and you're exposed to learning Greek and Latin and these kind of things. And you would actually read these things in the original. And so you would find that as centuries went on, people had sort of a base or a conversational link between these authors and those authors. And at the beginning of the 20th century, some professors at Columbia University, led by Mortimer Adler, looked at and said, this is not quite someone along with even these really intelligent young men who come to college here don't necessarily have enough of the background. So we need to systematize this. They're not getting the languages the way they used to. Maybe we need to have just a collection of these books and have these be sort of a core curriculum. So they come here. So Columbia's core curriculum, which is a reading and discussion group, not unlike our Great Books Reading and Discussion Circle, got started around then. And then the Mortimer Adler was the main person there. And then he was really encouraged by Hutchins, was the president of the University of Chicago in the 1920s or 30s. And he was thoroughly behind this idea. So he invited Adler and a whole bunch of others to come and set up sort of a Great Books Foundation where they would actually choose 50 or so volumes of great books to form as the sort of the standard canon, the basis of discussion that would be cross-indexed for great ideas. And that, people obviously could read beyond this, but this would be sort of a core that everybody could refer back to and have as a basis for discussion. And so they actually came out with a 54-volume set published by the University of Chicago and Encyclopaedia Britannica in 1954. And so that's what we're using as the basis for our textbooks to look at. And they're all complete works. They don't give excerpts. So if you're reading Don Quixote, and we will, it's the entire novel. So that's sort of a basic principle. And there's about 54 volumes that have various authors in there. So there's maybe 60 or 70 great authors. And the idea is that the people in the 18th century probably read the books of the 17th century there. And we can read these guys, they're dead now. They can't talk back when we ask questions, but we can hear the questions they asked each other, and we can participate in this kind of conversation. So Great Books Education, it was the publication of this set. Here's the one we're currently reading for Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, and Aristophanes, the Greek dramatists. And there's a list of the 54 volumes inside that goes from Homer to Freud, and is a particular set that we can look at is, again, that sort of basis for discussion. And I think Mortimer Adler popularized this idea, or tried to popularize this, in the 1950s. And so there are a lot of sets like this that people somehow bought with the aspiration to read them. And yet today you can get these on eBay or in yard sales or things, and most of the time you'll buy it and it's sort of unopened. You can tell nobody's ever read it because these are hard texts to read. It really helps to have a discussion group, people to talk with in a group. But this was a sort of an idea that Adler had that, okay, yeah, this is a lifelong learning project and people should read differently. It's not like reading a novel or reading a newspaper information article. It's, it's reading to challenge your mind with new ideas and to grow and learn from them. Reading to learn is a different style of reading from reading to entertain or reading to get to know. So this was, there was a time when there was an effort to make it sort of a popular thing that people could just do as a lifelong continuous learning project. I don't know how well that ever took off or went. There was a time when this was, I think, fair number of universities adapted this as either a core curriculum or the basis of their university teaching. But I think as time goes by, there's probably fewer places that do that. But there's still a number of institutions like Columbia, where it all started, where there is a 2-year great books reading and discussion seminar that's required of all Columbia students. So the idea is everybody goes, everybody reads the same books, they have the same conversations, they have a framework of reference to talk about with each other. The University of Chicago still has similar things. There's a couple of other universities. That's all they do. There's a place called St. John's University in Annapolis and Santa Fe. The entire educational curriculum is based around reading great books. There's no major, there's nothing you can study. You just go and you do great books education for 4 years.
And I can confirm, because that's my collection there. I won't move the camera because I'll mess it up. But that collection is a bit newer than yours. I think that they're still older than me. And if I pick one off the shelf now that I haven't read, I'm 90% certain it will have that. As you peel the pages, you can feel. Oh, I am the first person. Yeah. I am the first person to read this. I mean, I could talk about the great books and ask you lots of things there, but I wanted to. So I've got some thoughts on how to keep this within the context of this idea of building an encyclopedic mind.
Sure.
So we've got this particular set here. As you said, it starts at Homer and goes to Freud. Trying to imagine someone who's maybe interested in this idea, but again, maybe hasn't thought about it or conceptualized it in the same way. Just like me, I found it and was like, oh, that I should really have been doing this. This probably the course you described would have been really interesting for me. I would have been much better served if I'd done that than the degree I did, I think. But there you go. Do you think this particular set is enough for the average person to get started? Or would you say, well, it's good. Maybe I know you obviously believe it has you obviously believe it's a positive thing, but would you say it's good enough to get started on building an encyclopedic mind, or is it just the beginning?
It's the beginning. I'm answering, but it is good enough to get started as the beginning. It is the specific selection of books is, people, if you embark on the project, and you know anything about history and culture, you look at the list and you say, wait a minute, it seems like there's a gap here. Where is this author? And then wait a minute, why is this author on here? Everybody who would look at this would have a critique like that. So it's far from a perfect list, but it forms the basis of a core of a consensus. And if you're interested in this, then you should go read those other books that are these. Nobody said that these are the only books worth reading and knowing, but as sort of a core group to know and to start that process. I would say that I wish we're going to do more with those volumes of the great ideas, the Syntopicon, where now that we've read 4 or 5 books, we can take a topic like justice in times of war, or worship of gods in this fashion, or something like that. And it's cross-referenced and cross-indexed to things that we've read. So that's an integral part of the encyclopedic process, is not just reading and forgetting, but then reading and then going back and recontextualizing and seeing how it's connected and related to other things. So I think that this is as good a selection of 50 volumes as one could hope a group of people to make. It's never going to be perfect, but given that cross-indexing and the idea of saying, this is really something that is, we need somebody with those better mathematical skills than I think that either of us have, who could probably take these 51 volumes of texts, because the first 3 are these other Syntopicon stuff, 51 volumes, figure out how many pages there are, divide them by the number of pages that we've been reading on average. It's going to take us 10 years, 12 years or something to read all of these. And then the idea is that you start over. Because when you first came and you first read Herodotus, even though you'd studied history, you didn't know how to read Herodotus and you didn't have a frame of reference. So it was great. It was new. Well, when you go back and you read Herodotus, having read Thucydides and having read Tacitus and having read Gibbon and having read the whole, not just the other historians, but the people that you're going to see and appreciate so much more in Herodotus the second time around that you couldn't possibly have envisioned or found or noticed the first time around. So it was always conceived as a project of lifelong learning. It's never because these are the only books you should read, but it is a very good place to start.
Yeah, and just that whole concept of just reading something twice in itself was is quite revolutionary to a lot of people. It's quite difficult to get people to read a book twice. I found when I've tried to encourage this method with my own students and clients, and I've said, just read it through the first time. Don't worry about it too much, and if you come back to it later, if it's worth it, their minds. A lot of people don't like that idea. They want to read it once, understand everything the first time. I don't want to come back to it, but I have gone back to Herodotus. I keep going back to it. I really want to read the whole thing, but I've read some pages from like different translations just to get the feel as well of to get that feel of how different it can be depending on the translation. And every time it's just a different experience. And it's getting better each time. It's really interesting.
Well, you need to read it in Greek ultimately.
Well, I've got volume 1 of the Loeb bilingual translation, and it's I mean, I can read it and recognize words, but no, it's a goal. It's on my list. It's on my ancient Greek hit list.
Okay.
Put it that way. Although I have read it's particularly difficult because there's Herodotus is basically a style of his own, which is an interesting challenge. But related to what you were talking about there, actually, I had a question specifically about how would you recommend going beyond something like a great either this particular collection, or there are other collections of I forget, there was one called the Harvard Bookshelf, I think, is another one.
Bookshelf.
Yeah, there's other collections. There's lots of collections like this, or lists of like classical 100 classical works to read, or that sort of thing. How would you use this as a springboard? I'm thinking in terms of, do you have a systematic idea of how you would add to it, or just
I do, and it's somewhere on maybe my new website. I specifically looked at this list, and at a certain point when I was sort of now I'm more accepting of it as just a base, but at a certain point I'm looking at it, it's like, what really bothers me about this list is the entire period of the Middle Ages, which is my favorite and most interesting period of history. That's one that happened to be slighted. You have Augustine in the 4th century, 5th century, and then we have Aquinas in the 12th century. So we skip 600 or 700 years. We have Dante and Chaucer. So we've got 4 authors for the entire 1,000 years of the Middle Ages, and then we have like 30 volumes for the 500 years since then, and we had 17 for the like 1,500 years before that. So clearly it's been slighted. So I was thinking about that, and then I'm thinking about ways to do it. So yeah, I went through a period one time when I sort of very systematically read what histories of Catalan. I mean, where's the Catalan books? There's no. I know Raymond Lull. We talked about Raymond Lull. Why isn't Raymond Lull on here? So just sort of went through and tried to cull from literary histories and cultural histories the names of the classic books, the great books in other times, other cultures, other situations, to try to give this a little bit of balance and show things that have been left out. And so I have that sort of expanded great books list on my website. It's been years since I've worked on that or updated that. I know there's glaring omissions in there too, but that was sort of a project to look at that. And so, yeah, I think that would be a good place for people to start. I wish people could take more advantage of that. I mean, I think it's arranged so you can rearrange it and look at it by date or by language or something. And so you could say, oh, what's I want to read a great book that was written in Catalan. Oh, here's Raymond Lull. I want to read something more from the Middle Ages. So as a guide to finding that. But again, this is I realized that that was going to be a never-ending project, and and that list is so extensive that I don't think you couldn't read it in an entire lifetime. So it would be a guide to saying, if you want a list um, of books that are supposedly really seminal, important works in their cultures, in their in their times, had a big influence upon other thinkers in who knew about these books. That is a bigger list to go to, but it's not indexed like with the great ideas. It's in Topicon. It's not things, and there would be other things that could be expanded to it. So I guess my question is to somebody at your stage, if there was a personal interest, I wouldn't worried about trying to expand this right now. First, get these into you. Once you get these into you, then you can sort of naturally expand. Go to your historical background. Okay, you've got these into you, got these here. You see, you go back, you read Herodotus, Thucydides, Tacitus again, and you say, where's Sallust? Okay, well, go read Sallust. Okay, go read Josephus. Go read these other historians. Build them into the framework. But I would say you don't need to worry about that until you have read through all of these. So you can put that aside for 10 years at least, needing to expand it.
Yeah, I wasn't thinking so much of creating a larger, more expanded list as opposed to more about how to think about it. So, would you encourage creating a more systematically planned sort of program of study, or more just following interests and passions? Because I had this idea, for example, that I could go through plugging gaps in my knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
There are some subjects that I just haven't. I have a Wikipedia level, random Wikipedia level knowledge, maybe, and other subjects are not like that. So I thought, oh, well, if that's the case, maybe I could make a list of subjects and disciplines and at least aim, as I'm going through, to try to read like one or two books from each of these topics. Would you encourage someone to just follow their pursuits, follow their passions, follow their interests, or would you recommend sitting down and having some kind of systematic framework about it?
To build an encyclopedic mind?
Yeah, if that's the goal, if that's the ultimate goal.
Ideally, you should be able to work the former into the latter. That is to say, you should be systematic about it, but you should also be able to plan it around your interests. Like I say, it'd be nice to know more about botany, but I'm not feeling that lacuna in myself is to be particularly painful. It'd be interesting to know more about the structure of crystals or rocks, and I mean, very relevant. I'd like to know that, but just if you kind of draw a line between the sciences and humanities, I'm so emphatically on the humanities side that whatever I had in the science side would always be a smattering, and it would help me have a bit more, but it's, I feel the gap in my humanities. So I'm able to follow that interest in building. So I'm looking to have a broader understanding of the Middle Ages, say, would be that my contextualizing framework. And I'm following my interest, but I've got the base there. Okay, here's what I have already with the Middle Ages. What is missing? What can be filled in?
I've got another question connected to this for you, and it's about the well, you mentioned it, for the first book in this series. It's called The Great Conversation, and it's more of an extended essay, I would say, describing the value and and the necessity for this project in the editor's words.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, there's an argument in there which I think is quite interesting about, basically it's arguing for the focusing on Western civilization, which is interesting because growing up in school, now my experience of school, and I think this is quite common in most Western schools, there's this focus on, or there's this idea that children should be, rather than focusing on Western civilization, you should know about all civilizations. And that's presented as a positive way to understand cultures, understand people. But their argument, I thought, was quite powerful. The argument is that if you don't know your own culture very well,
Mm-hmm.
how do you have a frame of reference for really understanding other civilizations? So
that would be my stance completely.
yeah, so then connected to that, I wanted to ask you about I wanted to move into polyliteracy, which is your idea of we can say expanding the great books education into something else, creating a new scholarly field. But in that, you specifically, I have the quote from your website, which you can tell me if this is the same or not. It's more of a description rather than a quote. But in that idea, in fact, actually, this would be a good time for me to read that, I guess.
Go
So, well,
ahead.
but you can tell me if this is still up. It's about twice as long as the previous one. Tell me if this is still up to date. I've selected some parts. Polyliteracy is a scholarly discipline. It embodies a quest to develop an encyclopedic mind and to philosophically understand the nature of your own consciousness through the passionate, in-depth, and respectful study of as many different languages as possible, focusing both upon their diachronic evolution as actual entities and upon the intellectual heritage they have left in the form of great texts. As an academic discipline, polyliteracy is the direct descendant and heir of comparative theology. However, whereas comparative theology has a tendency to focus inwards upon the origins of the Indo-European family in a nationalistic sense, polyliteracy faces outwards towards expanding the individual scholar's horizons by imparting the ability to read classic texts of great works in the tongues of other civilizations. Polyliteracy can be described as a wedding of resurrected comparative theology with great books education, whereas comparative theology focused only upon closely related languages. Polyliteracy can and should involve the study of widely disparate languages as well. So I know there's a lot of information there, but would you say is that still a good summary of your idea of polyliteracy and what it should be as a field?
Yeah, I would not, I don't know if I would phrase it just like that if I reread it again, but I wouldn't, there's nothing I would, say, oh God, well, I didn't mean that, or, oh, I don't think that anymore, or I can't believe I ever, no, I would stand by that.
So just to maybe if I could summarize it in my own words and tell me if I've understood it right then. So it's this idea of combining great books or this great books approach to learning with the study of languages. And it's this idea that, the best way, if a text is worth reading, in your words, if a text is worth reading, it's worth reading in the original language. And
Mhm.
that there's like another level to this, and there is another level of understanding and you get from the text, and that this should be a pursuit as itself.
Mhm.
Would that be a fair
Yeah,
summary?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, just studying something like comparative literature, which might be the closest thing to my idea of literacy today is inherently narrow and made to be narrower and narrower and narrower on specific topics with specific fields and specific perspectives and specific sort of hermeneutic approach to it that gets away from either reading the literature for the sake of enjoying the literature or living it the way it might have been lived, and also really having that broader perspective of seeing what's out there. So yeah, I mean, I would definitely concur with what you said earlier, that I would say that yes, you should have a foundational knowledge in your own culture. So I would, if I could wave a magic wand or give me, the kind of person that would like to have this education, we could identify them when they're, still relatively young boys. I would, try to get Greek and Latin into them early on so they would have the wherewithal to read these texts, many of these texts in the original to begin with, and then encourage them to go out and to learn Arabic and Sanskrit or classical Chinese so they could get at this kind and caliber of texts that come from East Asian or Indic or Central Islamic, Middle Eastern type civilization as well. And I've spent big chunks of my life doing just that. I spent about 9 years each living in Arabic-speaking countries and in East Asia, trying to get a foundation there. And I've studied lots of Sanskrit for my life as well. So I've tried to have a base in those four languages that really, I think, if you take the most spoken languages of the world, the other big languages, and you look at the words that they have in them, almost all the words come from these languages. So I don't know what weight of humankind's, because words give us our concepts, words give us our ideas, words, so these words come from these few sources. And if you understand these sources, you can access these words in a wide variety of different languages. So yeah, it's much harder to learn how to read, say, Arabic or Persian than it is to read Latin or Greek. And so if you get to it after you have the experience of doing that, you're going to be able to appreciate it, learn how to do it more easily and appreciate it in a context. Whereas if you were just to take somebody from basically an educational cultural background that is Western civilization and shortchange that and say you're not going to learn that. You're just going to send you off to an ashram to learn Sanskrit. Well, maybe you'll learn some, but it won't. And maybe you'll end up thinking more like some like an Indian perhaps, but you won't have it won't be working towards the encyclopedic mind. It won't be working towards the comparative reference of Latin and Sanskrit, say.
So I think you kind of touched upon there what my question was going to be, connecting those 2 points. So your idea of polyliteracy as a discipline connected to this idea from the authors of the editors of the great books that you should focus on your own civilization first. So my question is, when do you think? I mean, there's definitely a lot of sense to this as well. Just from my own experience, I've tried in the past and often failed to dive into different areas, and I now realize this because I didn't have enough of a reference. Even just going on Wikipedia, for example, and trying to read a little bit of Chinese history doesn't work for me.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't work then. Even Dostoevsky was hard enough because all the names are just so foreign, and you just struggle to follow it. But when do you think is a good time to branch out? That's my question. So, like, when is it? If you want to pursue an encyclopedic mind, and you want to also pursue, if your idea of polyliteracy appeals, how, when do you branch out? Is what I'm saying. When do you go beyond in our case, Western civilization, and try to go into another one? Is there a optimal amount of time, or is it more interest that's important?
Well, if you're concurring with me that you should have a solid base and foundation in your own culture to begin with, then we can quibble about that definition. But does that, if you say, well, okay, again, learning Latin is a lifelong project, so you're going to continue getting better and better and better. But yeah, so at a certain point, you can judge that, yeah, I'm good enough to read this in the original. I'm kind of there. Reading through that line of books behind you, as I said, it's going to take 10, 12 years to do it on one take. So you don't need to do all of that. But if you've been doing that for 2 or 3 years and you've read all the different types of texts and you've experienced them and you're building your framework, once you've got a solid foundation in reading these and in the languages of your culture, then I would say as interest and opportunity provide occasions to do so. I don't know that it would make any sense to say, okay, you've been doing this for 3 years, you've got this here, now it's time for you to go do that, if you don't have any interest in doing that. And even you might be chomping at the bit to do that, but you haven't got your foundation either linguistically or culturally, historically, then I would say, now you should wait until you've done that. But if you've done that and you're so inclined and the opportunity comes to learn how to read Persian, then take it.
So that's an interesting point there. You just mentioned this idea that when you feel that you can read something in the original language, that might be a good sign. So is that fair to say when I can read Herodotus and Tacitus in their original, maybe I've spent enough time on it, maybe. Because this is the other issue with this, it's something I've kind of wrestled with as well. And this year I've come to realize it's about balancing. Obviously, if you want to learn multiple languages, you need to spend many hours on it a day. It's one thing getting that time up, and then I realize, but I also need to read. So I've decided to be less harsh, I guess, on myself when it comes to, I count reading more now. Whereas before I wasn't counting my reading time, I was only counting my language study time. So now if I am reading something, like one of these great books, I count that time more. I see it as preparation. So reading Herodotus is preparation. But there is a balancing act there. So would you say that's a good level to aim for? When I can read these ancient Greek and Latin authors behind me in quite comfortably, then maybe I've done enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to take a while.
It'll take a while. Yeah, it'll
That's
take a
going
while.
to take a while.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
not
when
that long,
yes,
but
when
at the
you
same
can,
time.
if you can ever possibly move Latin into the point where saying, "Well, yes, I'm continuously exercising it by reading it, and and things like that, but I'm not studying it or learning it anymore, so much, and I have the interest and the bandwidth to add in Arabic and or Sanskrit or something like that. Then yeah, then the time's right.
Interestingly, I don't think it will take that long for me, in particular with Latin.
Mhm.
There's yeah, it doesn't really feel. I don't really. I am obviously studying it now, but it doesn't feel so much as a challenge in that initial sense. Now it's more of a case of, okay, I just got the grind of the
Mhm.
repetition. I've got over that initial. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm kidding myself, and there's a whole hill of more difficult concepts coming. But it feels quite simple at this point. It feels like now I just need to keep working on it.
Mhm.
I don't have that feeling with Greek. That's going to take a bit longer. I'm on to my bonus round questions.
All right.
Okay. I'm on to my bonus round. If we got there, I said at one point that we might stay away from this. Might bring us into modern education, talking about the modern education, modern university system a little bit, but we can try not to get too worked up about it. I guess you can kind of think about this as generalists versus specialists. Taking the generalist approach or the specialist
Mhm.
approach to knowledge to study.
Mhm.
So it's not necessarily the point, shall we say, of modern universities. That's not what they do. That's not the kind of people they tend to pump out from
Yes, no,
them.
it is the opposite. The modern education is focused on the narrow specialists, not on the broad, not on the multi-capable generalist, and certainly not on the formation of the encyclopedic mind, which is why you asked before, was like, how widely would you like to spread this? That's why I said it would be very, sort of at odds with the ethos that's out there, which doesn't mean that it's dated or old or not worth pursuing. But it's just a fact that the ethos that is ruling the trend of education is going in the opposite direction of this entire project.
So, with that said, are there any, or who are they? Who are the modern or living minds that you do admire?
Well, one is that what you've signed up and you finally realized, okay, your Italian's good enough. He just died not too long ago, but Umberto Eco is the great Italian intellectual who wrote a number of novels, In Nome della Rosa, Il Pendolo di Foucault, which are like really seminal in my life in terms of frames of reference, things that I reread and look at several times. These novels by him are like, you know, very encyclopedic, literally so.
Hmm.
I mean, the name of the road is basically an encyclopedia of medieval theology and medieval perspectives and medieval history. And so I really enjoy that. But I also know that he's it went into some of there too. Apart from being a novelist, he was a professor of a field of linguistics and philosophy called semiotics, a science of signs, and written academic things on that. He wrote, I think you said you were reading how to write a thesis, right? So it's general academic Italian. And then I suggested for our group, which is going to be starting now, that he also wrote sort of essays that were cultural observation and criticism. What's going on in our society? How do you, all these kind of questions, and sort of presented for not in an academic ease and not in a novel form, but sort of in a, approachable essay form. So I thought that would be a good place for us to start. But so here you have a writer who's written some really wonderful, dense, meaningful novels that are, I think, in the best way to present this very profound knowledge of medieval history, intellectual history, um, a philosophical perspective about semiotics and science and how things are tied together, and a very keen eye observer for all sorts of trends that are happening in civilization around us. So um, he's somebody that just pops to mind right away. As he's again, he died, I think, 2015 or something, not too long ago. But that would be the first person that springs to my mind as an example of somebody who seems to have been also pursuing an encyclopedic mind. And I think the apart from the literary work that he left, it's just a fact about it. I think there's documentaries of his personal libraries, which dwarf yours and mine put together. He just had massive personal libraries of stuff that he knew when he was able to give tours of these places. He knew where things were. He could cross-index that kind of information. So the
I read that it was he had it's on his Wikipedia article. He had two homes that he spent most of his time in. In one, he had a 30,000 volume library, and in the other, his holiday home, he had a 20,000 volume library.
He's the sort of contemporary person that springs to mind as somebody that sort of embodied that question.
Yeah, and what's really interesting about his work as well is, I mean, I've only touched the surface of reading the first third, basically, of in the Name of the Rose. That when I was reading that, I haven't studied philosophy in depth, but I have gone through a long podcast that gave me a good overview. And I was reading it thinking, if I didn't have that overview, there's so much here I wouldn't have got. There's so much missing.
It's amazing to me that was an international bestseller. And it's not amazing to me that there's all sorts of like answer keys to it or companions to it or reader's guides to it that explain, who these thinkers were and what they stood for and what this branch of Franciscans were versus that branch of Franciscans.
But it's a real page turner as well, isn't it? It's not that's how I found. That's why I haven't finished it, because I was doing too much at the time, and I found myself staying up until the early hours reading this book, and I had to stop. I was like, I can't stay up till 1 o'clock reading this book. It's too much.
It's a book that I have read. I don't know how many times since it came out. It came out, I think it was maybe 15 or 16. I don't know that I read it immediately, but I think I got my hands on it pretty soon. I was always interested in Middle Ages and philosophies. And obviously at that point, I probably read it in English translation, but subsequently that's sort of one of my sort of go-to books that I like to listen to as an audiobook in a wide variety of languages. And I've got a Swedish copy of it over there, and a German and a French copy. I've read it in multiple languages and listened to it in multiple languages. I probably have read that book, I don't know. I would venture to say maybe 20 times, and I've never gotten bored with it. I've never said, "Oh, I know what's in it." I've never said, this is It's always that sort of page turner thing. I know in the back of my mind what's going to happen, but as he's narrating it, I want to see. I hope I didn't spoil some things for you. Maybe you haven't gotten yet, or the point.
I'm just gonna try and wipe that bit. Yeah, I'm just trying to not remember that. So you mentioned that you've read it in multiple languages as well. Mm-hmm. Is that as is that to facilitate like learning and practicing those languages? Is that why, because you know it so well? For example, have you listened to it in Swedish as an audiobook or read it in Swedish because you know it so well? Is that why you would have done that? To facilitate your Swedish, I mean.
Yes. I mean, so particularly with languages that I don't know, at the toppest of levels, or languages that I really don't. I mean, I've got it like in I haven't listened to it yet in Polish, but I've got if I found a Polish audio version of it, I got that, and that's something that I could, for example, I could probably listen to that, and precisely because I know the story so well, I could probably follow it, whereas I couldn't follow anything else, follow the thread and keep a narrative going in anything else. Very simple book in Polish, because I've done that so many times. So definitely it becomes a tool for working with languages. So you already know the story so well, so it's very valuable for that. But it's also precisely because I like it. I think that it's written in Italian. It's best read in Italian, but it's interesting to see how it's presented in French or Spanish or in German as well. So, yeah.
The final question for you then. So we've this whole project that we've been the whole idea of the great books, building an encyclopedic mind, and also we touched a bit on polyliteracy. All of these things, would you say they have a very autodidactic focus? These are things best you have to do it on your own. This is something that people would do on their own. so obviously that's been the main thrust of what we've been talking about. But I'm curious if you would give anything else, give any ground, shall we say, to the other end of the spectrum. Is there anything you can only get that you couldn't, just by following this path, that you couldn't get through self-study, reading all these books, something that you must go to a university to get? What would you say, if anything, there is that in that category?
Well, I mean, just as we were talking about, in theory, you could read the great books behind you by yourself. But I don't think you would get nearly as much out of them than if you did it as you're doing in a discussion group. So there is, yeah, and that was always, again, you asked earlier on the Mortimer Adler's idea of this lifelong education is that it's a communal project. You're communing with the minds in the past and with other minds here, and sort of sharing ideas and interpretations of it. So I think that in order to read these kind of texts, you need to have some sort of frame or focus or some sort of group to do that. For languages, though, if you have the materials to study on your own, I do think, ultimately autodidactic study is more effective and better than studying in a university class. But there are a lot of languages that don't have materials that you could study, so you might need to say, well, the only way I can learn this is by studying this in a class. And I think that studying in classes is, if you have good classes and good teachers, good professors, etc., that's a good way to learn how to learn. So to jumpstart your process of doing it, I do think, what you're here to, lifelong education is definitely the autodidact process to take over, and you have to learn how to drive it and do it yourself. But I think the thirst for it, the interest in it, and the environment for it can be cultivated in a good higher education, say, environment. So if you can get that from an educational atmosphere, then that's a great way to get started too.
All right, thank you very much. Is there anything we sort of touched on that we didn't you want to add anything to, or anything we didn't go deep enough to that comes to mind?
No, I think we have pretty much covered. I mean, you quoted me from things that I wrote in the past, and again, I don't have much to alter or change or say about that. Just further along the path towards it, and further along the path of finding and meeting and helping people like you get started on it. So that's very, very rewarding. But yeah, you mentioned, maybe it was Comenius or somebody talking about the sort of the spiritual side to it. I mean, I guess I would stress that too. It does that's becoming more and more important to me too as the years go by, in a very literal sense. This has always been an intellectual project, sort of a mental project, but I've also found that, as I said, I want to have a holistic, integrated mind, and the mind is not separate from either the soul or the spirit or the body or any of these things. And so I've always found that keeping it's a mental project, but my mind functions best when my body is functioning best. I've always found exercise and sports and integrating the two of them by listening to audiobooks, or just walking around when I'm doing, just making the maximum effort to get physical as well as mental. And also get, because of the nature of the books you're reading, I mean, it's easier to understand books of theology if you've got a theological mindset, if you have a frame of reference for placing it. And so much of these kind of texts, or the kind of things that are involved in an encyclopedic project, are in sort of spiritual, theological by nature, so that cultivating that and having that as a frame of reference, that makes it make a lot more sense as well. So just to the degree of having it be a truly holistic project, not just mental, but mental and physical and spiritual, is also an important aspect that maybe I didn't highlight so much in the past. Maybe I wasn't aware of it as much, or I don't know, but does seem we've mentioned it, but I would sort of highlight that area a bit more. But apart from that, no, I liked the questions you asked and the quotes I wrote in the past. So yeah, I'm happy with that.
Interestingly, that's what you've just mentioned there, is going into a region of, I had some questions or I had some thoughts on that, but I didn't put that in. Yeah, I'm curious if you agree with this. Like, I've been thinking about this more and more. So it comes down to that question of kind of why things are. Well, the title of the podcast is my favorite question, by the way, which is why. I used to I used to annoy people by asking this question excessively, like most children do, but excessively. And so one of the questions I've been wondering is this: why have we gone in this direction in terms of education, where things have been, well, to the point now where I'm not even sure just the exams are really, some exams, if they're really worth anything, because of just the way they've, again, we can go into that subject another time, maybe why it's gone the way it's gone. And one idea I've had recently is this idea that it might have something to do with the lack of, I heard a term recently, what is it? Like, we're living in an age of scientism, is a term I heard. And I think that does summarize my upbringing in a way. This idea that it wasn't anti-religious, but it was more like religion isn't necessary anymore because we have science, was the kind of backdrop.
Yep.
And I wonder that without it, so I've been diving more and more into, well, as I've said to you, one of my New Year's resolutions this year was to work my way through the Bible for the first time. And the more and more I kind of explore religion as a part of it, as opposed to this other thing that doesn't really matter anymore, I guess, that was the attitude I had, an attitude that the education system had. The more and more I'm interested.
I would say I come from that same pretty much mental universe.
But the more and more I get into it, the more and more I see the oneness, or the unity, which those are ideas that lots of ancient philosophers, lots of ancient writers had. Lots of people had this project of trying to unite all the ideas and trying to understand how everything is connected. Yeah, and it's something that I think maybe is a part of it. I don't know if maybe that might be part of the answer of why things are so fragmented. That if you don't have a conception of the divine or something spiritual guiding you, perhaps you are just not interested in asking why it's all connected. I don't know. That's just something that I was thinking about recently as I was thinking about my notes for this. It sounds like you might agree.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do come from that basic, that sort of mindset that, basic, it's just like the world is the way it is, and we're no point in asking questions about it. We're here, we die, we're over, and science has all the answers that we can know, and religion is for something in the past that people used because they didn't have the answers that we have now. That's the basic sort of educational environment and everything that sort of I came through, and that, really, I think a lot of Westerners, British or American people, that's why we get interested in things like Buddhism, because they're exotic and they're from somewhere else. And it's sort of like, okay, I'm part of the exotic mind. I'm learning more. But I think that if you can find any sort of tradition and practice it and sort of follow it and say, if I'm understanding the worldview that's presented here is as an, maybe speaking in analogies, but in terms of, what do, these senses that we have, the big, deep questions: who am I? What's the point of my life? Why am I here? In terms of getting any sort of coherent answer for that, if you really stack up the answers that the worldview we come from and some other worldviews, they don't necessarily give better answers. They probably give worse ones in some cases. So it's interesting to explore them from other perspectives.
I was going to ask you if you wanted to end with saying a little bit about the academy. I don't know if it necessarily bolts on very well from that from that topic, but we can. Or I can put it in the introduction.
I think we've been dancing. Yeah, I think we've been dancing around it the whole time. And I would like, as always, I mean, if this is sort of an advertisement, but I want it to be only that obliquely. Let it be information, let it be something, and let the advertisement be, if this is interesting to you, we do this over here, come join us. But I don't want this to be, hey, at the Academy, now we're opening a new section and you can join us for Italian starting on January 3rd. No, I don't want to do that.
But I'll put all that at the beginning. We can, maybe we can just end it here. I'll end the recording here. So thank you very much, Professor.
Okay, good.